I think it's important to realize that you need to think as your listener while you're creating a podcast. What does my listener not know that I need to make sure to clear up for them? What gaps do I need to bridge? Because obviously you probably know a story pretty well, and you, as the person who's telling it, have a lot of information, maybe more than the person who's listening to it, who is coming to it cold. So you need to describe things and decide how visual you're going to get, because there's this cool partnership that forms between the person who is telling a story on a podcast and the listener, in that whenever you describe anything in the format of audio, the listener is picturing something. And I know that Alex Bloomberg, who is a very popular podcaster, he has a show called Startup, and he's the owner of Gimlet, which is what the show Startup is all about, as he created this company. And he has this class that you can buy on Creative Live, and it's a webinar. So you could listen to it or you could watch him talking, but I'm sure you could just listen to this webinar. And in his first lesson, he talks about a scene in which he was recording a podcast with a blanket over his head at his home on his bed, because audio records in a more professional way when you put a blanket over your head if you're just recording a voiceover. So then he stopped and asked everyone who was at his class where he was speaking what color the blanket was. And everybody had an answer for the color. And it was just remarkable that the answers were all different. And that's what happens. The listener instantly starts picturing things on the canvas of the mind. So it's pretty fantastic, I think.
Hey, Shannon G, what's up? Yeah, it is pretty interesting, you know? It's like me, I'm totally blinding, you know? Sometimes people ask me what things look like. Well, I don't know. I try to envision them in my head, but just like, you know, I could always, like, when it comes to women, I could tell if I could tell if a woman's attractive, you know, just by her voice and all, just by her personality, you know, the way she carries herself. You know, I can usually tell that way. But yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I would have probably guessed the blanket would have probably been maybe red or black, I don't know, or gray.
Really good points you make. Really fantastic. Yeah, I'll tell you what. The masters of the painting the canvas of the mind were, of course, the professionals in old-time radio, in the age of golden radio, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 20s. They had to. There was no visual thing. They had to describe everything. I mean, in detail. From the World Fair to the costume set to movies, bringing books and movies to the ear. They had to do oftentimes creatively with dialogue. So you had to guess, you know. I mean, they had to change the dialogue in the book or whatever to describe what was going on to a certain extent. And then, like you said, everybody pictured what they wanted out of it. You know, if you were trying to portray an elegant woman, you had to. Well, you could do it like Humphrey Bogart, and there she was in velvet and whatever, or you could, just have her change her voice, like, make it like, I don't know, Mae West or something like that. Those guys, I mean, they were experts at the craft of, allowing the listener to paint a picture on the canvas of the mind. So yeah, and I never thought that podcasters would be talking about it, but that's an interesting tip about putting the blanket over your head. Interesting. Yeah, but then how much do you out and out explicitly say? And you could maybe do some of the description by sound effects. I mean, having actual sounds from the environment you're talking about. Yeah, or like if you were there traveling or whatever. That would help paint the canvas. You wouldn't even have to say a word. You wouldn't even have to explicitly, write it out or say it. You could just, choose different sound effects in the environment where you're interviewing. Like, have a few clips, play in the intro, or, whatever. I guess radio professionals have been doing that for decades, even now, So, yeah, I don't know how many podcasters actually do that. Actually, at the beginning or in the middle, they have a segment just with sounds, or maybe over their voice. So, yeah, it's an intriguing topic. Thank you for bringing it up.
Hi, Shannon. This is the same idea behind writing. When you're writing, you want to include the details that the reader would observe visually or through audio if they were wherever you are when you're covering the topic. And with audio, you need to include the same details, just like you would if you were writing.